Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Jeff, and until recently, I thought I had everything figured out. A thriving career in software engineering, a beautiful wife, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. Turns out, perfection can be a convincing illusion. Diane and I have been married for 6 years. She's everything you'd expect someone's dream girl to be: smart, stunning, and charismatic. At least, that's what I believed. Over time, though, there were cracks. Nothing glaring at first, just little things. The way she'd brush off conversations about our future, her sudden interest in new hobbies without ever sharing them with me, or how her phone was always glued to her hand, notifications muted. I didn't want to overthink it, chalking it up to her being independent. But deep down, something felt off. I should mention that I've always been a trust-first kind of guy. I believed love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Diane and I built our lives together from the ground up. She'd supported me through the grind of long nights coding and the countless rejections before landing my big break. And when the money started rolling in, I thought we were both reaping the rewards of our hard work. It wasn't until a few months ago that I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. Diane had started spending a lot of time at the beach. At first, I thought it was harmless. She always loved the ocean, and we lived near one of those pristine California beaches that could make anyone fall in love with the waves. But she wasn't inviting me along. When I offered to join her, she'd smile and say, "You've got so much work. I don't want to pull you away." Then came Justin. Justin was the name I started hearing more and more. Justin said the waves were amazing today, or Justin's been teaching me about surf photography. He was just a beach guy she'd met during one of her morning walks, she said. A free spirit who loved talking about the ocean and life. She insisted there was nothing to worry about. And like an idiot, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Diane had never given me a reason not to trust her. But things didn't add up. The expensive camera she suddenly bought, claiming it was for capturing the beauty of the ocean. The extended hours she spent at the beach, even on days when the weather was terrible. And the way her tone would shift, lighter, more alive, when she talked about her new friend. I brushed it off until one evening, after she'd come home late, smelling of salt water and something that wasn't her usual perfume. She claimed she'd stayed to watch the sunset and lost track of time. That night, as she showered, I sat in our kitchen, staring at her phone charging on the counter. I wanted to trust her, but my gut told me to look. I didn't. Not that night, anyway. For weeks, I wrestled with myself. Was I being paranoid? Jealous? Or was my gut trying to tell me something my heart refused to accept? I'll end it here for now. Trust me, things get worse from here. If anyone's been through something similar, I'd appreciate hearing how you handled it. I'm still piecing everything together and could use some perspective. Thanks for sticking with me, everyone. Picking up where I left off, things got harder to ignore after that night. Diane's behavior was too much to brush off as coincidence, even for someone like me, who desperately wanted to believe the best about her. It wasn't long before my doubts started eating at me. I'd never been the jealous type, but this felt different. It wasn't just insecurity, it was this gnawing sense that I wasn't getting the full story. And when you're married, you're supposed to get the full story, right? I told myself I needed to stop making excuses and take a closer look. So one morning when Diane was out, claiming she had a yoga class, which had conveniently started around the same time she met Justin, I sat down with her laptop. I didn't want to snoop, but I couldn't live with the what-ifs anymore. I started small. Her browser history was clean, too clean for someone who browsed as much as Diane did. Then I opened her email. There wasn't much, some promotional stuff, a couple of work emails, but nothing personal. The kind of emptiness that felt deliberate. My heart was pounding, and I was just about to give up when I saw the folder labeled Archived. It wasn't the name of the folder that got me, it was the fact that it had been recently modified. I hesitated. This was crossing a line, and part of me still hoped I was wrong. But when I clicked it, I found an email thread that made my stomach drop. It was between Diane and Justin. The messages were vague but had enough breadcrumbs to piece things together. References to meeting up, laughing about how he doesn't suspect a thing, and an attachment, photos of the two of them on the beach, her head on his shoulder. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking. Part of me thought, this isn't real. This can't be Diane. But there it was, right in front of me. Proof that the woman I'd built my life around wasn't who I thought she was. When Diane came home that evening, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I didn't know what to say, or if I even wanted to hear her side of the story. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. I needed more than a few emails. I needed the full truth, no matter how ugly it was. So I got a recording device. It wasn't hard to set up. I work in tech, after all. I hid it in the living room, where she often took phone calls when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I felt sick about it, but I needed answers. Over the next week, I tried to act normal, even though every interaction with Diane felt like a lie. She'd laugh, kiss me, ask about my day, but all I could think about was the betrayal sitting on that laptop and what else I might uncover. The recording was how I caught them. One evening, while I was at the office late, she invited Justin over. I played the recording later that night, sitting alone in my car in the driveway. Their conversation was everything I'd feared, and worse. They laughed about how easy it was to hide things from me. Justin joked about how Diane was working on me to drop our prenup. I hadn't even considered the financial angle until that moment. But hearing them talk, it became clear, Diane wasn't just cheating. She was scheming. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry, either. Something inside me just went cold. By now, the facade of my marriage had shattered. I couldn't look at Diane the same way anymore. Every smile, every touch, every I love you felt fake, like I was living with a stranger. But instead of confronting her right away, I decided to play it smart. I needed time to process everything and figure out my next steps. The day after I listened to the recording, I called in sick to work. My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear: if Diane was plotting against me, I wasn't going to let her win. I started gathering evidence. The first thing I did was download everything off her laptop, emails, photos, even a few deleted files I managed to recover. Then I went back to the recording device. It had caught more than just their conversations. There were sounds, laughter, moments that made my stomach turn. Part of me wanted to throw it all away, but I knew I'd need it later. Next, I called my lawyer. Let me tell you, that conversation was a wake-up call. I explained the situation, about Diane, Justin, and their apparent plan to use me for financial gain. My lawyer didn't sugarcoat anything. He told me that while I had a solid case with the prenup, things could still get messy if Diane decided to fight dirty. Jeff, he said, this isn't just about catching her in the act. You need to protect yourself, your assets, your reputation, everything. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. Diane wasn't just a cheating spouse, she was a threat to everything I'd worked for. Over the next few days, I started putting safeguards in place. I changed passwords, locked down our joint accounts, and set up alerts for any unusual activity. I also moved some of my funds into a separate account Diane didn't have access to. It wasn't about being petty, it was about making sure I had control if things went south. But the hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Diane didn't suspect a thing. She still smiled at me over dinner, still kissed me goodnight. Every time she touched me, I wanted to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't let her know I was onto her, not yet. Then one evening, something happened that threw me completely off balance. Diane left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. I'd been avoiding snooping through her phone, mostly because I already knew what I'd find, but this time, I couldn't resist. Unlocking it was easy. I knew her passcode. What I didn't expect was the flood of messages between her and Justin. They weren't just talking about their fun at the beach or their plans to meet up. They were discussing me. Justin, does he suspect anything? Diane, not a thing. He's as clueless as ever. Justin, good. Just keep playing the doting wife. Once you convince him to get rid of the prenup, we'll be set. Diane, working on it. He'll come around eventually. He always does. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just betraying me, she was mocking me, treating me like some clueless fool. I wanted to storm upstairs, confront her, and throw her and Justin's garbage relationship in her face. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. If Diane thought I was clueless, I'd let her keep thinking that, for now. Later that night, while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. Diane wanted to play games? Fine. But this time, I'd be the one calling the shots. After reading those texts, I knew I couldn't sit idle anymore. Diane and Justin were actively scheming to destroy me, not just emotionally but financially too. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was pretending everything was fine. Diane's ability to act normal baffled me. She'd still greet me with that radiant smile, ask about my day, and even make plans for the weekend. It was like I was living with two versions of her, the woman I'd loved for years and the one conspiring behind my back. But now, I had a plan. The first step was gathering even more evidence. My lawyer had emphasized that the more I had, the better my chances of protecting myself. So I upgraded my recording setup, adding a hidden camera in the living room. I knew Diane and Justin used that space to talk when they thought I wasn't around. Sure enough, within days, the camera caught them. One evening, while I was working late, Justin came over. They sat on the couch, laughing and joking like they didn't have a care in the world. The camera picked up bits and pieces of their conversation. Diane, I've almost got him where I want him. He's been so stressed with work, he's barely paying attention. Justin, good. Once you convince him to go all in on that new house, we'll be golden. No prenup, no problem. I clenched my fists as I watched the footage later that night. They weren't just planning to milk me dry, they were waiting for me to make a move that would leave me completely vulnerable. The second step was enlisting help. I confided in my best friend, Mark, someone I'd known since college. Mark wasn't just a friend, he was the guy who'd been there for me during all-nighters, breakups, and everything in between. When I told him about Diane, he was furious. Jeff, you can't let her get away with this. Whatever you need, I'm here. With Mark's help, I started putting the final pieces of my plan together. He suggested hiring a private investigator to dig deeper into Justin's background. At first, I thought it was overkill, but Mark insisted. The more dirt we have, the stronger your case. It didn't take long for the PI to find something. Justin wasn't just some carefree beach bum. He had a history of shady relationships. 2 ex-girlfriends had taken out restraining orders against him, and he'd been sued for fraud a few years back. The guy was a walking red flag, and Diane had fallen for him hook, line, and sinker. The third step was preparing for the confrontation. I wasn't going to let Diane turn this into a drawn-out, messy battle. I wanted control, and that meant having everything ready before I confronted her. I had copies of the emails, texts, recordings, and footage. I'd moved all my assets into a trust she couldn't touch, thanks to my lawyer. And I'd even filed the preliminary paperwork for divorce. Diane thought she was running the show, but she had no idea what was coming. Then, out of nowhere, Diane threw me a curveball. One Saturday morning, she walked into the kitchen with that same fake smile and said, "Jeff, I've been thinking. Maybe we should look at that property in Malibu again. It's such a perfect place for us to start fresh." Her words were like venom, but I played along. "You really think now's the right time? Work's been crazy, and that place is a big commitment." She leaned in, wrapping her arms around me. "I know, but I think it's what we need. A new chapter for us. Don't you trust me?" If she only knew how much I didn't. That was the moment I decided it was time to act. The pieces were in place, and I wasn't going to wait for her to make the next move. After weeks of preparing, the time had come. Diane thought she was steering the ship, but I'd been quietly working to take the wheel. My lawyer had everything ready, and Mark was on standby if I needed backup. The stage was set, it was time to confront her. It happened on a Friday evening. Diane came home from one of her supposed beach yoga sessions, her face glowing and her hair tousled like she'd just stepped out of a photo shoot. The sight of her disgusted me, but I kept my cool. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "I was thinking we could order in tonight. Maybe Thai?" "Sure," I said, keeping my tone casual. "But first, we need to talk." The way her smile faltered told me she wasn't expecting this. "Oh? What about?" I motioned toward the living room. "Let's sit." She followed me, her movements slower, more cautious. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out if I knew something. Once we were seated, I took a deep breath. "Diane, I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything you've been hiding?" Her expression was a mix of confusion and panic, but she masked it well. "What are you talking about? Hiding what?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I know about Justin. I know about the affair, the lies, and your little plan to get rid of the prenup. So let's skip the part where you deny it and go straight to the truth." Her face went pale. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she laughed, a dry, nervous sound. Jeff, are you serious? Justin is just a friend. I don't know what you think you know, but you're way off base. I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. Right. Let me show you how off base I am. I played the recording I'd saved, the one of her and Justin laughing about me being clueless, plotting to manipulate me into dropping the prenup. Her jaw dropped as Justin's voice filled the room. Stop, she whispered, her face turning red. But I didn't stop. I kept playing it, letting her hear every disgusting word. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Care to explain? I asked, my voice ice cold. She stared at me, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. Jeff, Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with more lies. You are going to destroy me, our marriage, my trust, everything. For what? Money? Some beach bum who's using you as much as you're using me. Her tears spilled over, and she reached for me, but I recoiled. Jeff, please let me explain. Explain what? I said, standing up. That you betrayed me? That you were planning to gut me financially? I've heard enough, Diane. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid, okay? I messed up, but I didn't mean for it to go this far. I laughed bitterly. That's your excuse? It went too far. Diane, this isn't some mistake. This was calculated. You knew exactly what you were doing. For a moment, she said nothing, just sat there crying. Then she looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. Can we fix this? Please, Jeff, I'll do whatever it takes. I love you. Stop, I said, my voice firm. You don't love me. You love what I provide for you. But that ends now. I dropped the divorce papers on the coffee table in front of her. Sign these, or I'll see you in court. Either way, this marriage is over. Her face crumbled, but I didn't care. I'd given her my trust, my love, and everything else, and she'd thrown it all away. I'll give you until Monday to get your things, I said, turning toward the stairs. After that, I don't want to see you here again. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't over yet. There was still the legal battle to come, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control again. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. Diane hadn't come downstairs after our confrontation. I didn't care. I was done trying to figure her out or second-guessing my decisions. Now it was about moving forward, on my terms. I spent the weekend putting my life back in order. I boxed up all her personal belongings and left them in the garage. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for her to leave when she came to collect them. It was cathartic, in a way. Each item I packed felt like another piece of her hold on my life being stripped away. Diane, predictably, tried to regain control. That Sunday, she came downstairs, her face blotchy from crying, holding the divorce papers I'd given her. Jeff, she said, her voice trembling, we don't have to do this. We can go to counseling, work things out. Please, don't throw away everything we've built. Everything we've built? I repeated, staring her down. You mean everything I've built? You didn't love me, Diane. You loved the life I gave you. Don't stand there and act like this was real. She flinched, tears spilling over. It was real. It is real. Justin meant nothing. I was just confused. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You made your choices. Now live with them. You'll find no sympathy here. The rest of the day she kept trying, bringing up memories of the early days of our relationship, talking about how much she regretted her actions, swearing she'd change. But her words felt hollow. She'd already shown me who she really was, and I wasn't about to forget it. On Monday morning, she packed her things and left. She didn't say goodbye, and I didn't offer one. Watching her drive away felt surreal. For 6 years, she'd been my partner, or at least I'd thought she was. But now, she was just a stranger leaving my driveway. The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions. Relief that she was gone. Anger at the betrayal. Sadness for the life I thought we had. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office to keep my mind busy. My team noticed something was off, but I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I wasn't ready to face the pity or the awkward conversations. Mark checked in almost daily, dragging me out for lunch or a beer when he thought I needed it. You did the right thing, he kept saying. It sucks now, but trust me, you're better off without her. Deep down, I knew he was right. But knowing it didn't make it easier. The divorce proceedings were as messy as I expected. Diane didn't take the prenup challenge lying down. She hired a lawyer, claiming I'd been emotionally neglectful and trying to argue that the prenup should be voided. But my lawyer was a shark, and with the mountain of evidence I had, her arguments didn't hold water. Still, it was exhausting. Every time I had to see her in mediation or hear her name in legal documents, it brought everything flooding back. She didn't just want to hurt me emotionally, she wanted to destroy me financially. But in the end, the prenup held. Diane walked away with nothing more than what she'd brought into the marriage, which wasn't much. Justin, as far as I knew, had disappeared. Whether he bailed on Diane when things got tough or was just lying low, I didn't care. He wasn't my problem anymore. The first real step toward healing came when I redecorated the house. I stripped away every trace of Diane, new furniture, new artwork, even new paint on the walls. It wasn't just about changing the space, it was about reclaiming it as my own. I also started seeing a therapist, which Mark suggested after one too many beers. I resisted at first, thinking I didn't need it. But those sessions turned out to be a lifeline. They helped me unpack the betrayal, understand my own worth, and figure out how to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. 6 months later, I feel like a different person. I've reconnected with old friends, taken up new hobbies, and started traveling more, something Diane always claimed we didn't have time for. The betrayal still stings sometimes, but it no longer defines me. I'm not the guy who got cheated on or the guy who lost everything. I'm Jeff, a software engineer, a good friend, and someone who's learning to live on his own terms again. And as for Diane, I don't know where she is, and I don't care. Thanks for following my story, everyone. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can reshape you, but only if you let it. Keep your head up, take control, and remember, you're stronger than you think. The next few months after Diane left were some of the most challenging and transformative of my life. Watching her car disappear down the driveway felt like a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd finally won after weeks of pretending, planning, and gathering evidence. But instead, it felt more like surviving a plane crash, alive but battered, and with no clear idea of what to do next. At first, I threw myself into work. It was easier to focus on code and deadlines than to face the silence of the house we used to share. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but they didn't press me. That was fine by me. I wasn't ready to talk about it, not even with Mark. He still checked in regularly, dragging me out for a beer or a burger when he thought I needed it. He'd say things like, "You did what had to be done, Jeff," or "You're better off without her." I'd nod along, but deep down, the loss of trust and the sting of betrayal were wounds that no pep talk could bandage. The divorce itself was a slow, grinding process. Diane didn't go quietly. She fought tooth and nail, trying to challenge the prenup and claim I'd been emotionally neglectful. She even hinted at Justin being a better emotional support for her, which was a special kind of irony considering the circumstances. My lawyer, thankfully, was sharp as a tack. Between the ironclad prenup and the overwhelming evidence I'd collected, Diane didn't stand a chance. Still, every mediation session, every document, and every passing mention of her name felt like reopening the wound. When the divorce was finalized, I expected to feel free, but the relief didn't come right away. Sure, Diane didn't walk away with a dime beyond what she'd brought into the marriage, but there was no victory in it. Winning a war still leaves you with scars. The turning point came a few weeks later when I decided to strip the house of everything that reminded me of her. I started with the obvious things: her clothes, her pictures, the little trinkets she'd picked up on vacations. Then I went further, repainting the walls, replacing furniture, even buying new bed sheets. It wasn't just about erasing her, it was about reclaiming my space, making it mine again. By the time I finished, the house felt different, lighter, freer, like a place where I could start over. Around this time, Mark pushed me to see a therapist. I resisted at first. I told myself I didn't need to talk about my feelings or unpack the betrayal. But Mark wouldn't let up, and eventually, I gave in. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. Therapy didn't magically fix everything, but it gave me the tools to process what had happened. I started to understand the patterns I'd missed in my marriage, why I'd ignored the red flags, and how to rebuild my self-worth. 6 months later, I'm in a completely different place. I've reconnected with old friends, some of whom I drifted away from because of Diane. I've started traveling, a solo trip to Iceland, a long weekend in the Rockies, things Diane always claimed we didn't have time for. I even picked up surfing, which felt poetic in a way. Every wave I caught was a little victory, a reminder that I could face the unexpected and come out on top. Diane? I don't know where she is, and I don't care. As for Justin, I assume he's off using someone else, but he's no longer my problem. The weight of their betrayal doesn't sit on my shoulders anymore. It's behind me, like a bad dream I've woken up from. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can break you down, sure, but it can also reshape you. You get to decide how the story ends. For me, I'm writing a new chapter, one with no room for deceit, manipulation, or lies. Just me, my life, and whatever's next. And for the first time in a long time, I feel ready. Life after Diane felt like rebuilding a house that had been gutted by fire. Even though I'd made strides toward reclaiming my independence, there were days when the quiet crept in, filling the spaces where our life together used to be. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. It wasn't just the betrayal that haunted me, it was the loss of the future I thought we were building. But time, as they say, has a way of dulling even the sharpest pain. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to feel more like myself again. Therapy helped, giving me clarity and a deeper understanding of why I'd ignored Diane's red flags for so long. The truth was, I'd been blinded by my own expectations. I wanted so badly to believe in the story we were telling the world, that we were happy, successful, and in love, that I ignored the reality staring me in the face. Mark kept being my rock through it all, even when I tried to push him away. One weekend, he dragged me to a barbecue at his place. "You can't just work and hide at home forever," he said, shoving a beer into my hand. I grumbled about it, but by the end of the night, I was glad I'd gone. I met new people, laughed for the first time in months, and for a few hours, I felt like the old Jeff again. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I got a message on LinkedIn from a woman named Claire. She was a project manager I'd worked with on a contract years ago, smart, driven, and easy to talk to. We'd always had a good rapport, but nothing more than that. Her message was casual, asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. At first, I hesitated. The thought of opening up to someone new felt daunting, like jumping into a pool without knowing how deep the water was. But then I remembered something my therapist had said: healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about learning to trust yourself again. So I said yes. Meeting Claire was like a breath of fresh air. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two old colleagues catching up. We talked about work, shared some laughs, and by the time we parted ways, I realized I hadn't thought about Diane or Justin once during the entire conversation. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started seeing more of each other. It wasn't serious at first, just casual dinners and walks along the waterfront. But the more time I spent with her, the more I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. She was kind, genuine, and most importantly, honest. She didn't play games or keep me guessing. What you saw was what you got, and after everything I'd been through, that kind of transparency felt like a gift. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Claire turned to me and said, "You seem lighter than when we first reconnected. Like you finally let something go." I smiled, looking out at the water. "I think I have. I'm starting to realize that what happened with Diane doesn't define me. It hurt, sure, but it doesn't own me anymore." She nodded, her hand brushing against mine. "That's good. You deserve to be happy, Jeff. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her words stuck with me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I don't know what the future holds for me and Claire, or even if there's a me and Claire long term. But I do know this: I'm not afraid of what's next anymore. Whether it's with her, on my own, or with someone I haven't met yet, I'm ready to face whatever life throws at me. Diane taught me what betrayal looks like, but Claire's teaching me what it feels like to heal. And for that, I'll always be grateful. A year after Diane left, life looked entirely different. It wasn't just the changes I'd made, the house renovations, the solo trips, the new hobbies, but the way I felt inside. The weight of her betrayal no longer consumed me. It was still there, like a scar that occasionally itched, but it didn't define me anymore. Claire and I had grown closer, and though I'd been cautious at first, things had naturally evolved. She was patient with me in a way I hadn't expected, never pushing or prying but always making it clear that she cared. She brought a sense of calm into my life that I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, we were sitting on her balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. The city lights twinkled below us, and there was this easy silence between us, the kind you only get when you're completely comfortable with someone. "Jeff," she said, breaking the quiet. "Do you ever think about her? Diane, I mean." The question caught me off guard, but it didn't sting the way it might have months ago. "Not really," I admitted. "She pops into my head sometimes, but it's more like remembering a lesson than reliving the pain. If anything, I think about what I've learned from it all." Claire smiled, resting her chin on her hand. "And what's that?" "That I'm stronger than I thought," I said, meeting her gaze. "And that I deserve better." She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "You do. And I'm glad you know that now." It wasn't a dramatic moment, no swelling music or grand declarations, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. As the months passed, life continued to settle into a rhythm. Work was going well, I was reconnecting with old friends, and I'd even started mentoring younger engineers at my company. Helping others navigate the challenges I'd faced early in my career felt meaningful, like I was paying forward the support I'd once been given. Then, out of nowhere, Diane reappeared. It started with a message on Facebook. "Hey Jeff. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I was hoping we could talk. There's something I need to say." I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, but another part, one I didn't fully understand, was curious. Against my better judgment, I replied. "We met at a coffee shop near my office." She looked different, tired, worn down in a way that made me wonder if life with Justin hadn't been the fairy tale she'd imagined. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Diane?" She hesitated, fiddling with the edge of her coffee cup. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, all of it. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back, and I'm sorry." Her words didn't stir the anger I'd expected. Instead, I felt nothing. I realized then that I'd already closed the chapter on her. "Why now?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. She sighed, looking down at her coffee. "Justin. He wasn't who I thought he was. He used me, lied to me, and left when things got tough. I guess I finally understand what I put you through." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, but I didn't need her misery to feel whole. "Diane," I said, leaning forward, "I appreciate the apology, but I've moved on. I don't need closure from you, I've already found it on my own." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded. "I understand. I needed to say it." The conversation ended shortly after, and as I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because Diane apologized, but because I realized I no longer cared about her opinion. I was free. These days, life is good. Claire and I are still together, and while we're taking things slow, I feel hopeful about where we're headed. I've learned to trust again, not just in others but in myself. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone going through betrayal, it's this: the pain doesn't last forever. It shapes you, teaches you, and if you let it, makes you stronger. Diane's betrayal was the hardest thing I've ever faced, but it led me to a life I'm proud of, a life that's truly mine. Time moved on, and with it, so did I. The apology from Diane, though unexpected, felt like the final thread tying me to the past had been cut. I didn't think about her after that day. Whatever regrets she carried were hers to deal with, not mine. Life with Claire became more stable, and with every passing month, it felt less like I was rebuilding and more like I was simply living. I'd stopped questioning every good thing that came my way, wondering if it was too good to be true. Instead, I began to embrace the happiness I was creating for myself. One weekend, Claire and I went hiking in the mountains. It was one of those crisp autumn days where the leaves were fiery shades of orange and red, and the air was cool but not cold. We stopped at a clearing with a view of the valley below. Sitting on a fallen log, sipping from the thermos of coffee Claire had packed, I realized how far I'd come. "I like seeing you like this," Claire said, her voice breaking the quiet. "Like what?" I asked, glancing at her. "Peaceful," she said, smiling softly. "When we first started spending time together, You always seemed like you were carrying something heavy. But now, you just seem lighter." I didn't answer right away, letting her words sink in. She was right. The weight I'd carried for so long, the betrayal, the anger, the self-doubt, was gone. I wasn't the man I used to be, and I was okay with that. "Claire," I said after a moment, "I never thought I'd get here. For a long time, I thought what Diane did would define me forever. But it doesn't. And a big part of that is because of you." She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "You did the hard work, Jeff. I just reminded you of what you're worth." Her words stayed with me long after we finished the hike and drove back home. In the months that followed, I continued to lean into the life I was building. I started taking on more leadership roles at work, mentoring young engineers and helping the company innovate in ways I hadn't imagined before. It felt good to give back, to be a part of something bigger than myself. Claire and I grew closer, and while we hadn't officially moved in together, we spent more time at each other's places than apart. It was easy, comfortable, and above all, honest. There were no secrets, no games, just two people figuring things out together. One evening, while we were cooking dinner at her apartment, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Have you ever thought about getting married again?" I paused, the knife in my hand hovering over the cutting board. It wasn't the kind of question I'd expected, but it didn't feel out of place either. "I have," I admitted. "But only recently. For a long time, I thought I'd never want that again. I guess I was scared of making the same mistake." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not about avoiding mistakes though, is it? It's about learning from them." Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I realized then that I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd learned what I needed to, and while there were no guarantees in life, I was ready to take a chance again. I didn't propose that night, but the idea planted itself firmly in my mind. Over the next few weeks, I started thinking about what a future with Claire might look like. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted it. When the time came, I kept it simple, just the two of us, a quiet evening at home. I didn't need a grand gesture or a big crowd. I just needed her. "Claire," I said, pulling a small box from my pocket, "you've shown me what love is supposed to feel like. You've been patient when I needed it, honest when I didn't want to hear it, and you've reminded me that trust isn't something to fear. It's something to build. I want to keep building with you." Her eyes filled with tears as I opened the box to reveal a ring. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, wrapping her arms around me. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when Diane walked out of my life, but it was the one I needed. Life is unpredictable, messy, and sometimes cruel, but it's also full of second chances. I took mine, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. Marrying Claire felt like the beginning of a new chapter one never thought I'd write. The wedding was small and intimate, held at a lakeside cabin surrounded by our closest friends and family. Mark stood by my side as my best man, grinning like he'd personally orchestrated my happiness. Claire's parents, who'd always been warm and supportive, were practically beaming the entire time. It wasn't extravagant or over the top, it was simple, and it was us. As Claire walked down the aisle in her understated lace dress, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come. A year ago, I was sitting in a quiet, empty house, reeling from Diane's betrayal. Now here I was, watching a woman who'd shown me what love and trust could be, walking toward me with a look of pure joy on her face. When we exchanged vows, mine came straight from the heart. I told her how she taught me that love isn't about perfection or pretending everything's fine. It's about showing up, being honest, and building something real together. Her vows mirrored that sentiment, and when she slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The reception was a blur of laughter, toasts, and dancing under the stars. Mark's speech was a mix of heartfelt sentiment and embarrassing college stories, and Claire's maid of honor told everyone how Claire had secretly been smitten with me from the moment we reconnected. It was one of those nights where you wish you could freeze time, just to hold on to the happiness a little longer. After the wedding, Claire and I went on a 2-week honeymoon in Italy. We explored the narrow streets of Florence, marveled at the ruins of Rome, and took lazy afternoon gondola rides in Venice. It wasn't just a honeymoon, it was a celebration of everything we'd overcome to find each other. When we got back, life felt new again. We moved into a house we picked out together, a cozy place with a big backyard and plenty of space to grow. Claire started teaching me how to garden, which was hilarious at first since I had no idea what I was doing. But there was something grounding about working with my hands, planting seeds, and watching them grow. It felt symbolic, in a way, nurturing something new after the destruction of the past. Work continued to thrive, but I made sure it didn't consume me the way it had before. I'd learned the hard way that success isn't just about climbing the ladder, it's about balance. Claire and I made time for each other, for little things like Friday night movies on the couch or Sunday morning hikes. One day, about a year into our marriage, Claire surprised me. She left a tiny gift box on the kitchen counter with a note that read, "Open me when you're ready for the best news of your life." Inside was a positive pregnancy test. I was stunned. We hadn't been actively trying, but we talked about kids and knew we wanted them someday. Holding that little piece of plastic, I felt a wave of emotions: excitement, fear, gratitude. Claire walked in, her face glowing, and I pulled her into a hug. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Completely," she said, laughing through her tears. "You're going to be a dad, Jeff." The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. We turned one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, decorated with soft colors and woodland animals. Mark joked that I'd be the first tech dad to install a baby monitor with AI features. When our daughter Lily was born, everything changed. Holding her for the first time was like nothing I'd ever experienced. She was so small, so perfect, and in that moment, I knew my life had truly come full circle. Lily brought a kind of joy I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Her laughter filled the house. Her tiny hands gripping mine reminded me of the responsibility and privilege of being her dad. Watching Claire with her, rocking her to sleep, reading her stories, only deepened my love for her. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just living a new chapter, I was living the life I was meant to have all along. Diane's betrayal was a wound I never thought would heal, but it did. And in its place was something stronger, brighter, and infinitely more fulfilling. Life isn't perfect. There are sleepless nights, messy diapers, and days when work feels overwhelming. But when I look at Claire and Lily, I know it's all worth it. If you told me years ago when I first discovered Diane's betrayal, that I'd end up here, with a family I adore and a life I'm proud of, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's the funny thing about life. Sometimes, the worst moments pave the way for the best ones.